This video is going to be about a pet peeve that I have. And that's this idea that we should blame the internet for a surge of misinformation. I get really frustrated by this argument. And recently it was made again on the Jordan Peterson podcast with Sam Harris as the guest. So Sam Harris was making these kinds of arguments. He was saying that the information landscape has been shattered because we have all these independent voices that basically have no standards and they're spreading all kinds of misinformation. And this seems to imply that somehow we believe more false things now than in the past because of the internet, which is kind of a stretch to believe. Okay, let me play what Sam Harris said.
I'm increasingly worried that uh, we have effectively rendered ourselves ungovernable based on the way we have shattered the information landscape. And I think independent media of the sort that we're indulging now uh, is part of that problem. I mean, I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but I've been fairly vociferous in criticizing some of our mutual friends, and in my case, some may be former friends, but fellow podcasters and people in independent media, and I just think they've been part of this shattering, and it's been fairly obvious. And the cases are different, but many people have been quite irresponsible in the way that they have platformed people uncritically and let them spread truly divisive and dangerous misinformation.
Okay, so he calls attention to independent media outlets. That seems to imply that they're doing a worse job than the media that's more established. Like, do they really spread more misinformation than corporate media? I recently made a video about conspiracy theories. I'll link to it below. And I talk about this, about the media. And there's a section that talks about intelligence agencies like the CIA who use the media to spread all kinds of falsehoods to, for example, drum up support for a war. There are clips from whistleblowers, people who used to work in these intelligence agencies like the CIA, who say that their job was to propagandize the public and to spread misinformation. So we've always had misinformation in our media landscape. But I don't know, I guess Sam is saying that it's worse now because there are more narratives out there. Maybe he's saying that the narratives out there are more dangerous than the ones that were spread in the past by these professional propagandists. That's a stretch, okay, because the things they were saying would actually lead to wars and people dying. So, which was more dangerous? So, there are people out there who are convinced that the world is flat because they read stuff on the internet. Okay, but who are they hurting? Or the people who believe that the moon landing was fake? Again, how much damage have they done compared to professional propagandists, people in power who have propagandized the public to get them to act in unison and drum up war, not just in America, in every country? Obviously, an example that people may have heard of was what happened in Nazi Germany. Nobody denies that there was a lot of propaganda under Nazi Germany. So which false narratives have actually caused more death and destruction? The delusions caused by state power are more harmful, I think, on average. I can't quantify this, but this is just based on what we know about the past. And let's not forget also the propaganda that we experienced during COVID, all the lockdowns and everything, the destruction, the economic destruction we had, picking winners and losers among businesses. Small businesses had to be closed, but Walmart was allowed to stay open and liquor stores were allowed to stay open. And you had an enormous transfer of wealth, enormous destruction. The other thing they bring up is that all these fractured narratives have fractured our culture so that we don't have any coherence.
We don't have a shared story anymore. And I think a culture is literally a shared story. And a story is a structure. This is, been part of our ongoing discussion for a very long period of time, right? The relationship between the perceptual framing that is constituted by a story and, let's say, the domain of objective facts, right? This is a very thorny problem. But it seems to me that you have a culture when people share the same story or the same stories. They have the same shared reference points. And with an infinite landscape of communication that fragments indefinitely.
Now, I agree with Jordan Peterson that there is a problem when we don't have a shared story. But I think that it's more of a problem because we don't have it's more of a problem when we don't have shared values or religion. It doesn't have to be a problem just because we don't share opinions about politics, because it's not the divergent opinions that I think is the biggest issue. I think it's the intolerance of the divergent opinions. So if everybody had different political opinions, but they didn't get so zealous or rabid about them, that could be fine. So I'm just thinking about friends or family that I have. We have differing opinions when it comes to politics, but we can still be in the same room. There's no animosity. We just think that the other person is not correct about those issues, but we're not disowning them or something because of political opinions. So it's not the differing opinions, it's the intolerance. And right now there's a lot of intolerance towards differing opinions about political topics. During COVID, people got really worked up where they would disown family members over issues related to COVID. And I think that actually, in a lot of cases, when people are very zealous when it comes to their opinions, again, I blame propaganda. I blame the mainstream media more than these independent voices. I think that they've made it so that people will hate other people who disagree with them on these topics. It's not just that those people are wrong on these topics, they're bad people. The other thing about this whole talk of coherence, I'm not sure what Jordan Peterson is advocating for, because would you rather have coherence where everybody believes the same delusions? Or would you have the scenario we're in now where everybody believes different things? Because in the past, I think a lot of people were probably under the same delusions. And that's what would keep the harmony. I think political leaders were always propagandizing their public. So when you had these shared narratives, it was intentional. It was often because leaders, kings, pharaohs wanted their people to think a certain way. So we think that a lot of this discord that we see right now is all organic. And I'm not sure that that's true. I think a lot of it might be due to professional instigators and propagandists who purposely split people apart. And speaking of propaganda, it's always been around ever since we've had societies with leaders that wanted to control their people. I, I was reading the Aeneid recently. There was a section that I found amusing. The story, it's actually a work of propaganda itself, at least that's how some people see it. It was written, what was it, 20 something BC, between 29 and 19 BC, by Virgil, who was a Roman, and at the time the emperor was Augustus. And the story is essentially about the founding of Rome. The character Aeneas, he was a Trojan warrior. After the Trojan War, so they lost, the Trojans lost, Aeneas looks for a land for his people, and he is fated to land in Italy and to an area that will ultimately become Rome. His descendants would become the emperors of Rome. And this is something that the fates have decided. And the reason why people say that this was like a work of propaganda is that it basically gives off the idea that these Roman emperors, it's like the fates decided that these would be the emperors. It's like this preordained thing. So it gives legitimacy to these emperors. But long story short, once Aeneas lands in the spot where they're supposed to found Rome, there's a goddess, her name is Juno. Long story short, she doesn't want this to happen. And one of the things she does is some rabble rousing among the local people there, the people who have already been living there in Italy. So she gets people to hate the Trojans, to see them as the enemy, and to wage war. She even instigates what's essentially like a false flag attack. So Aeneas' son at one point is hunting in the forest, and she guides his arrow to kill this stag. But this stag is not just any stag, it's sort of a pet of some people, some local people living in the countryside. So Aeneas' son kills the stag, and this angers a lot of the country people. So now they join in on the war against the Trojans as well because of this whole thing with this pet stag. And this part stood out to me here. Here's a part that really echoes things that are happening now. You can take brothers who love each other and set them at each other's throats. You can turn a house against itself in hatred and fill it with whips and funeral torches. Anyway, techniques like this to drive people apart, they've always been around. False flag attacks and propaganda, ways to get people to fight wars for you. That's always been around.
It really is bottomless. I mean, the ocean of misinformation and half truth and misunderstanding is bottomless. And the tools we have built to rectify misunderstandings and to spot lies and to be better truth seekers are there, but they have been in some sense this is asymmetric warfare. They're no match for the information waste product that can be produced more quickly.
Again, do we believe more false things now than in the past? Something that's ironic is that Sam Harris is generally pretty against religions. And I think it'd be fair to say that he thinks that if you are religious, that you're living under delusions. Now, people in the past were a lot more religious than they are right now. And it wasn't just that they were religious, but religion would infuse almost everything in their lives. They believed it. It was so strong that it could lead to wars like the Crusades. So I think Sam would say that people in the past then were under mass delusions. Okay. Now, I'm not saying I agree with that or his assessments on religions, but that's what I think he would say. Now, we have a less religious society now, but he's saying that we're somehow more, we have more falsehoods now because of the internet, because of all these other things that we believe now. And yet, in the past, you see wars because of religions. Now that's quite rare. And again, I just want to make the point I said earlier, like all this so-called misinformation that people believe in now, how much damage has it done? How many wars has it led to? Now, he talks about the fact that we don't have tools to deal with all the misinformation online. I think we're still evolving. We're going to have a situation where there are going to be AI generated videos that look real and it'll look like somebody said something or did something that they didn't actually do. I think people will learn that you have to watch out for that. I don't know how successful they'll be, but to some extent, we're learning how to deal with the new landscape. That's part of it. But the main point I just want to make is, are we really more under delusions than in the past? And I mentioned the thing about religion earlier. I don't want to imply that because societies in the past were more religious, that they were under more delusions. That's not what I'm saying. I think it was just easier to have the society all believe the same delusions because they weren't hearing as many diverse opinions. There weren't citizen journalists who were filming. I know we don't use film anymore. I was just talking about this earlier today, how I keep saying filming or videotaping, even though like we don't use film or videotapes. So we have citizen journalists who are recording, who can record events as they happen, for example, right? So then now they can show footage from wars and say there are war crimes. But yeah, it does make it harder to govern. Is that bad? It does. I could see how that might mean that a government or society has more difficulty getting big projects done. It's sort of like the story of the Tower of Babel, which they actually bring up in this episode, but they bring it up in a way that I guess I don't really agree with their interpretation. But you could see that story in both a positive and negative light. When everybody is speaking in different tongues and they have such different beliefs, it's harder to get them to work together towards some very, very large goal, some ambitious goal. At the same time, it's more difficult to govern. So presumably, it would be more difficult to control them. So it would be harder for some totalitarian government to succeed. And that's good. So there are positives and negatives. There are trade-offs. Everything is a trade-off. There's no ideal solutions when it comes to misinformation. You just have to decide which is worse. are you gonna make it harder for a totalitarian government to be in place, but at the expense of coherence? You don't have as much coherence. I mean, I would take that over everybody believing the same thing, where there's a lot of coherence in this society, but they're easily controllable, right? You have one megaphone that's telling them what to believe, and they believe it.
We've trained up a culture of people or cultures of people uh, that simply don't care about facts. Really, they want a story that aligns with their in some sense their confirmation bias. I mean, they have certain things they want to believe. There's certain ideas they like the taste of, and then they just want people catering to that appetite, and there's a good business in that.
So he's basically just saying that we have confirmation bias and we have certain things that we want to believe. But isn't this just being human? I don't think it has anything to do with the internet per se. You think people during ancient times would have had an open mind about, hearing that they were wrong about what they believed about their values or the gods that they believed in? Or what about during medieval times? So,
The All of these institutions have embarrassed themselves in recent years, and for the reasons that I think you and I would fully agree about. This became most obvious during COVID, but it's the October 7th is more of the same. But I would just point out that the antidote to that, to the failures of institutions, is not new standards. It's really to apply the old standards. I mean, we need the institutions.
Spoken like a true conservative.
Yeah. Fine. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, so it's
No,
I mean,
no, but right.
but the antidote to failures of science, say, or scientific fraud, is not something other than science. It's just more science, real science, good science, scientific integrity, and so it is with journalism or any academic discipline or anything that purports to be truth seeking. We have standards, and there's nothing wrong with our standards. What's dangerous about the current information landscape, where we have just this contrarian universe where anything that is outside the institutions is considered to have some kind of primacy, right? Where everyone is kind of a citizen journalist, a citizen scientist, where you just kind of flip the mics on and talk for 4 hours, and that's good enough. What that's selecting for are the people who have no standards to even violate, right? I mean, these people are incapable of hypocrisy. I mean, the one thing that's good about the New York Times and Harvard and any other institution you would point to that has obvious egg on its face at the moment is that at a minimum they're capable of being shamed by their own hypocrisy.
okay, I don't know where to begin here. Okay, he said something about for a lot of people these days, outside institutions have primacy. I'm not sure what he means by that. If he means that a lot of people are no longer reading the New York Times, they're prioritizing or choosing the alternative outside institutions, the alternative media. Okay, there's a reason for that because the New York Times and all these legacy institutions, they've just failed spectacularly, which he admits. It almost sounds like he's also implying that people just listen to these alternative media just because they're alternative. I don't really think that's the case, but he doesn't really back that up if that's what he's implying. It's pretty crazy also that he says that the New York Times, at a minimum, that they have they're capable of being shamed by their hypocrisy. Give me an instance of that. Um, what is he talking about? The New York Times spread the Russia hoax. They've been wrong on so many things. I mean, going back to the Iraq War, they were wrong on that. I mean, they've been wrong on so many things. Biden's dementia. I could go on. Not even really gonna justify this with more of a response. But the biggest thing is he talks about, okay, we need to apply the old standards. So what is that? Does he mean like fact checking from experts? So who are the experts? The people who, have credentials, like they have PhDs in the topic that's relevant. But the thing is, like, he wouldn't even be satisfied with that because during COVID, there were people with PhDs. in the relevant topics who were, saying things that were different from what Fauci was saying, for example. And I think Sam Harris would just say that, oh, those are not the good experts, that, maybe they're schizophrenic or something like that. Anyway, Sam is just not very careful in his thinking. What are the standards here? What are the standards that the New York Times is applying that some really great Substacks, for example, aren't doing? Now, I understand that there's a lot of crap out there in the alternative media too, but it's quite a stretch to say that the New York Times is doing better than some podcasts or Substacks in terms of what they've been getting right. I mean, there are podcasters out there or Substack newsletters that were more factually correct about all kinds of contentious topics that made correct predictions when the New York Times didn't. Anyway, it's too bad that Sam doesn't seem to know about them. Anyway, something I do agree with them on is that they were talking about how when people are anonymous on the internet, or even when they're not anonymous, otherwise normal people will act psychopathic on the internet and say all kinds of things that they would never say in real life. And I mean, these are not deep insights. A lot of people have said this. But yeah, I agree that this is a problem. It's a bit like how people act when they're in their cars and they can get psychopathic and have like road rage inside the little bubble of their cars, but they would never do that like face to face. So, anyway, it's a problem. And this is why I think that when it comes to tricky conversations, it's better to have them in person rather than online, or at the very least over the phone. But yeah, these are not new insights. In general, I'm very unimpressed with Sam's thinking. Um, I'm not saying that he hasn't had some valuable things to say, but on this topic, I mean, he doesn't even really have an argument. So if you're saying that we believe more misinformation, we're more deluded because of the internet, what are you backing that up with? Do you have any data? And I understand this is a hard thing to try to quantify. You can't measure this because the people in the past they're dead. And it's also hard to gauge whether someone is deluded or not now or in the past. That's the problem, is that we disagree about what the truth is. But if you go by who has caused more damage, okay, I don't think there's a contest here that the people and the media that had political power, the institutions, they caused vastly more damage than the hoi polloi, the little people online who are spreading some misinformation, or even Joe Rogan or Tucker Carlson. He brings them up, he singles them out because they have large platforms. Were there cases of things that they said or people that they platformed, that led to anything approaching the damage from, say, the Iraq War? By the way, he brings up a case like Daryl Cooper, who has a history podcast, and he says that he seems to link him to a rise in anti-Semitism. And he doesn't even get the facts straight about Daryl Cooper. He says that Cooper said things that he didn't actually say. I think he said that Cooper was minimizing the Holocaust. And if you listen to Daryl Cooper's podcast and his interview on Tucker, if you actually listen to what he says in context, I don't think that you could say that he is anti-Semitic or denying the Holocaust. You can say that he is a revisionist, though. By that I mean his take on World War II and the origins of the war. They're not like the takes that you would like the mainstream takes. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. They're not anti-Semitic takes, though. And there are legitimate historians who have also been revisionist also. And Cooper, I don't think is doing anything that different from them. This is one of them by AJP Taylor. This was I haven't finished this. Pretty much only at page 84. It's kind of dense. I've been learning a lot. That's why it's been kind of slow going reading this. But I've been blown away, and I don't know whether everything in here or even most of it is correct, but I've just been blown away at how different the narrative about the origins of the Second World War, how different it was from what my impression was, where, what you learn, everyone just blames Hitler. And of course, Hitler should get a lot of the blame, but there were a lot of other things going on. So that's that. That's a revisionist history. He's not the only one. And it's not the same thing as being anti-Semitic. So yeah, he's saying that there's some rise in anti-Semitism, and that's because of these podcasters. I don't know, maybe it's because of some of the things that the Israeli government has done. It could be that. One last thing is that this idea that the internet is causing a dramatic rise in misinformation, it's often an excuse to censor the internet or social media. So that's one concerning thing. But that's not even the main point of this video. My main point is just that they don't even really have an argument. They haven't argued that the internet has, they haven't argued that we believe more false things now than in the past. And even if we did, they haven't shown that the internet is the cause of it. But I would say the first thing that I said, that's their key thing, is that do we even believe more false things than in the past? All right, that's all I have to say about this. I'd love to hear people's comments about this. Did you listen to this episode, or what did you think about this topic in general? Okay, thanks for watching.